Hello there. Welcome to the Saraway channel wherever you are in the world. I hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing fine, thank you very much, and lots of love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're having a fabulous day and you're ready to relax and enjoy a great story with me. And I want to say a special thank you to anyone who's been buying me coffee. It means a lot to me, more than you know, so I really appreciate that. But let's get started with our story, shall we? But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Where on earth is Georgina? Asked Morgan, glancing out of her kitchen window of her double-storey home, half expecting to see Georgina Baldwin's car rolling up her driveway. This was a first, as Georgina was never, ever late. I have no idea what could be keeping her. I mean, when in the history of our entire lives has Georgina ever been late for anything? She said, looking up at her friend Fern, who seemed equally as bewildered by this incongruous conundrum. Out of the three women, Fern could easily be relied upon to keep the ladies waiting, and for her being late was not at all unusual, as she could be a little scatty at the very best of times. But Georgina was a different kettle of fish altogether. It was part of her punctilious character to always be efficiently organised at the very best of times. So it was not a surprise this morning that the bitter, rather unpalatable taste of concern hung in the air, for something wasn't right. Fern began to open up the Tupperware container she'd brought along with her to Morgan's house, by way of a useful distraction, as it was good to keep herself busy, especially given she was so troubled. Fern's gut was already beginning to clench, so that her lower back was aching, and her shoulders were tense and uptight. She was saying a silent prayer to herself that please God may Georgina be all right, may nothing bad have happened to her. She began generously piling some decadent chocolate brownies onto her plate, into such a huge pile, which was far too much for three women to consume, so much so it rather resembled a large pyramid. Her long, slender fingers were trembling nervously as she stacked the brownies on top of each other, like Lego blocks. The burgeoning sense of unease would not abate. It was wilfully clawing its way at the back of her throat, so much so that she was beginning to feel profoundly nauseous. "Are you all right, Fern?" asked Morgan, removing the boiling kettle from the range oven, and walking towards the three mugs splayed out on the kitchen countertop, all owning its own single spoon of coffee, along with a couple of teaspoons of coffee creamer and sugar. "You've gone terribly white all of a sudden. Goodness gracious, you're such a worrier, Fern. You're bothered, aren't you, that Georgina isn't here already? But unlike me, who believes there has to be a logical explanation as to why Georgina is so late, you are typically looking into worst-case scenarios already, aren't you, Fern? What are you like? That imagination of yours needs to be reined in, like a wild horse, if you ask me." Fern heaved a huge sigh. "You can read me like a book, can't you, Morgan? I can't help myself, can I?" she admitted. "And as for having a wild imagination, it's the bane of my life. I'm always fearing the worst. I mean, if my kids arrive home 5 minutes late from school, after being dropped off by the yellow school bus, if they're late, I start imagining that they've been abducted or something ridiculous like that. But when it comes to Georgina Baldwin, I just don't feel good about Georgina being late like this. It's just so out of character for her, that's all. I mean, have you ever once in your life known Georgina to be late for anything? Go on, admit it, Morgan. It hasn't happened once, not since we've known her, and we've known her since we were little." Morgan was pouring out the hot water from the kettle into the mugs. She paused when she reached the third mug on the countertop. If she filled it with hot water, and Georgina hadn't arrived yet, her coffee might go cold, so she decided against it. She nodded her head in agreement, her heart feeling a little heavy. Please God, she wasn't becoming paranoid like Fern. Was Fern's overactive imagination as contagious as a flu bug, she wondered? She certainly hoped not. If the truth be told, she was equally as troubled by the absence of their good friend at her home, because she knew Georgina should have been here at least 15 minutes ago. "No, I can't say I've ever known Georgina to be late," she admitted frankly. Exactly, said Fern. You know what Georgina's like. She's a stickler for punctuality. She has such strong views on the matter. She can't abide being late for anything. Indeed, she's always scolding me when I arrive at your house late, reminding me that even though we're the very best of friends, that my lack of punctuality is extremely rude. Let's not kid. It's in her innate nature to be supremely efficient, and that is what makes her a great attorney. If Georgina was a car, she'd probably be a Bentley. She's elegant, efficient, and extremely classy. I, on the other hand, if I was a car, I'd be a sad little Peugeot with a penchant for breaking down at the most inopportune times. I mean, I don't believe Georgina has been late a day in her life for anything. So why? Why is she not here? Morgan tried to keep her composure and to wear a nonchalant, untroubled expression on her face. But it wasn't easy to fool Fern, whose shoulders were slumped forward, and she was currently holding the arch of her back, as if her lower back was suddenly giving her a whole lot of pain. Fern was discerning by nature, and was what some may describe as a sensitive soul. She did have an overactive imagination, which one day could be her greatest undoing if she didn't bring it into check. Maybe Fern should consider attending writing classes, where she could use her imagination as an outlet for stories, rather than bringing it into her daily life, so that she was forever worried and tormented when things didn't roll out as smoothly as she expected them to. Fern, I wish to goodness sake you wouldn't look so stressed out. Quit frowning, will you? It doesn't suit your face. Don't worry about a thing. We're going to have a nice hot cup of coffee together and enjoy some of your delicious chocolate brownies while we wait very patiently for Georgina to arrive. She would have texted us if something was up, I'm most sure. I rather suspect she's got caught up in traffic or something. She probably can't answer our messages, because you know what she's like. She doesn't speak on her cell when she's driving. She's very responsible like that. Maybe there was an accident on the highway, and she's probably caught up in a traffic jam, but I'm sure she'll be here soon enough. Sometimes even the most punctual among us can be waylaid by life circumstances that are beyond our control, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anything bad has actually happened to her. Morgan's reassuring words had brought a very small measure of comfort to Fern. Of course, her friend was right. That must be what this was about. They had sent numerous texts to Georgina that morning, and those texts had gone unanswered, because Georgina was probably caught up in a traffic jam. And indeed, Morgan was right. If there had been an accident on the highway, Georgina would have gone out of her way to help wherever she could. That was why she'd failed to make contact with her two best friends. But she'd be here soon enough, Fern assured herself, again and again, because the alternative was not something she wanted to think about. Georgina and Morgan were like the sisters Fern had never had in life, and they were so close to her, and she couldn't imagine what her life would be like without them. And if she was to lose her friends in unforeseen circumstances, she was pretty sure she'd fall apart like a crumbling cookie. You're right, Morgan. Let's get stuck into the coffee, shall we? And the brownies, of course. We need a useful distraction. And I could do with something sweet. I hoped you would say that, said Morgan appreciatively. We need to stop thinking about Georgina's whereabouts for the moment and think about other more positive things. Maybe you can tell me how your kids are getting along at the moment. Oh, you know, they're absolutely fine, said Fern, who had seated herself comfortably at the breakfast nook and was warming her fingers against the mug of hot coffee. Carol has started ballet classes. She's enjoying them very much. Her teacher says she's a natural. And James, well, he's been asking his father if he can keep bees. He fancies selling honey on the side. He's always liked the idea of being an entrepreneur, even at his young age. He wants to call the honey he sells Honey by James. Quite a sweet name, actually, I think. But what a lovely idea! To keep bees, I mean, said Morgan, trying to draw Fern away from thinking about Georgina. As long as he doesn't have allergies, of course, to bee venom, then I think it's a great idea. And with James only being 11 years old, it's good to start young in becoming an entrepreneur. I believe as parents we should encourage our children to think outside the box, just like James is doing. As parents, we don't want to become like those parents that give in to their kids' every whim, so that when they do venture out into the big wide world, they're completely useless at applying themselves to anything, because they're so used to being mollycoddled by their parents. Fern appeared to be silent for a long time, almost as if her thoughts were miles and miles away. She seemed to have distanced herself from the conversation, as if her mind had drifted into an alternative reality, and she was failing to hear anything that Morgan was saying to her. She glanced again out of the window, her eyes focusing on Morgan's driveway, and it was clear that trying to change the conversation from Georgina over to any other subjects, even her own children, was futile. Morgan sighed. It was no use carrying on this conversation with Fern, not when she was being like this. Fern looked so disquieted. Her fair skin had taken on a grey hue, and under the table she was banging her feet nervously against the floor, as if tapping a drum very quietly. Morgan knew that this was a self-soothing gesture that her friend tended to adopt when she was extremely discomforted by something. "Please don't keep looking out of the window, Fern," she said, reaching out with a hand to give Fern's arm a tight, reassuring squeeze. "You're making things 1,000 times worse for yourself by worrying like this. And you know what the biggest joke is of all? I read somewhere that half the things we tend to worry about never materialize at all, and I believe that's true. Besides, you know what they say, Fern. A watched pot never actually boils. You're right about that," said Fern, now turning her attention away from the window, reaching out to grab one of her chocolate brownies. She took a big bite, enjoying the fudgy sweetness of the rich chocolate. She had indeed made an exceptionally good batch of brownies this week, as some batches were a bit hit and miss, and some were better than others, even though the recipe always remained the same, which was something she could never quite understand. The three women loved Fern's brownies, but she refused to share with them her secret recipe, for it had belonged to her great-grandmother, that the family insisted could not be shared with anyone. "Oh, these are excellent," said Morgan, taking a large bite of her brownie. "No one makes brownies quite like you, Fern." "Well, I can't take credit for the recipe, can I? It's my great-grandmother's secret recipe. So if she's listening to you from beyond the grave, it's her that you need to be thanking, not me." Morgan responded by waving a mischievous finger at Fern. "One of these days, when you're a little tipsy," she said with a teasing wink, "I'm going to get that brownie recipe out of you. See if I don't." "Not a chance of that ever happening," chuckled Fern, taking another bite of her brownie. "If I revealed my great-grandmother's secret recipe, she'd probably haunt me from beyond the grave. And I'm not kidding about that either. So I'm sorry, much as I love you, Morgan, as if you were my own sister. Great-grandmother's secret is never to be shared, not even with my two very best friends." It was every week that the three women got together on a Wednesday morning at about 9:30 for tea at Morgan's house. Georgina, who was an attorney, always managed to get every Wednesday morning off, and she'd used the spare time to meet up with her two best friends. The three young women had grown up together and had been inseparable ever since. When they became teenagers, they swore that when they got older, they'd never ever lose touch, and they had remained true to their promises. These days they lived quite close to each other in Nova Scotia, and they had become as close as sisters. Indeed, there were many locals in the area that believed the three women were related, because in an odd, rather peculiar way, they looked uncannily alike, if that was at all possible. Maybe you really do become like the company you tend to keep. All three women had their hair dyed the same honey blonde colour, from the same hairdressers in town, and their hair was shoulder length, and in similar styles. They had fair skin and blue eyes, and were in relatively good shape, although Morgan sometimes over Christmas tended to put on an extra 10 pounds in weight, but she always managed to lose it the following year by following a rigidly strict Weight Watchers diet. Morgan sighed with relief when she heard the sound of Georgina's silver Mercedes rolling down her driveway. She didn't need to glance out of her kitchen window to feel reassured that Georgina at long last had arrived at her home, for she'd recognised the sound of Georgina's car engine from a mile away. Morgan was pretty certain there was a very good reason why their good friend had been held up, and she was keen to find out why Georgina was so incredibly late this morning. "Fern!" she said, pressing her nose to the window. "Guess who's just arrived? It's Georgina," she said brightly with a warm smile lighting up her blue eyes. "Didn't I tell you, Fern, Georgina would be here, and that you were worrying unnecessarily? She must have been held up, that's what it was. I told you nothing bad had happened to her. She was just waylaid, wasn't she? It happens to the best of us." "Oh, I feel so relieved," said Fern, rising quickly to her feet and brushing away some of the crumbs from the brownies that had gathered on her sweater. "I wish I didn't worry like this so much. If I don't watch myself, I'll end up having a nervous breakdown. My husband is always warning me about that." She was holding her hand on her chest to calm her heartbeats down. "What am I like?" she chuckled. "Worrying for nothing like this." Both Morgan and Fern were stay-at-home mothers who had 2 children between the ages of 10 and 13, and all 3 women had 1 boy and girl of similar ages. Georgina Baldwin had always been the ambitious one of the 3 women. She worked full-time as a very successful, affluent attorney, while her husband Keith Baldwin stayed at home and took care of their 2 kids, 10-year-old Danny and 8-year-old Fawn. The couple had agreed that while Georgina went to work, her husband Keith, who was an aspiring author, would look after the children when they returned home from school, take care of the grocery shopping, and so forth, while at the same time working on his book, that he was absolutely certain would one day end up on the New York Times bestseller list and change the fortunes of his family for good. Georgina had encouraged Keith to write the book he longed to write, because she'd been earning more than enough money to support the family and pay for her children's private school fees and extracurricular activities. But 7 years on, her husband Keith appeared to be making little progress with his literary aspirations, although he had led Georgina to believe that his bestseller he was supposed to be writing was very close to completion. But it was only recently that Georgina had expressed scepticism about her husband's book, and wondered if he was making any progress at all, for he simply refused to tell her anything about the book he was writing, apart from the fact that it would change their lives and be an international bestseller. Georgina had wondered more than once, in a moment of private, rather soulful contemplation, whether it was all a pipe dream on her husband's part, but the last thing she wanted to do was to discourage Keith, as creativity of any kind should always be nurtured. "I just don't believe my husband Keith has nearly finished his book, as he claims," she told her 2 best friends in confidence the previous Wednesday over tea, where the 3 women had met up at Morgan's house. Failing that, they'd sometimes organise a lunch date together, usually at their favourite Italian restaurant in town that was well known for its delectable all-you-can-eat pastas. "I mean, if the truth be told, he's so desperately secretive and guarded about everything he writes. He locks himself away in his study for hours on end in order to write his book, which I can understand. But he tells me nothing about the plots or the characters that he's writing about," she had complained rather bitterly. "It's really beginning to bother me, you know. I mean, I'm supporting our family financially and have been doing so for the last 7 years. And I think I have a right to know what my husband is writing about, don't you? But he simply refuses to let me in. And I'm beginning to find his evasiveness and clandestine secretness exceedingly annoying." Morgan looked cynical. "You know you're right, Georgina. You've been supporting your family financially, and your husband Keith hasn't done a damn thing to help you around the house. I mean, he's been working on that book of his for 7 years, and your husband is refusing to tell you anything about the characters and the plot of his novel. I'm sorry, but it sounds very iffy to me. Why is he so convinced it'll be a bestseller anyway? How can he so presumptuously predict that his work is going to be such an outstanding success? Think about how many writers send off their work to publishing houses to be rejected over and over again. It happened to J.K. Rowling, you know, until finally she found a publisher who accepted her work. And of course the rest is history. Hers was a success story of note. But her story was the exception to the rule. It's not like that for your average aspiring author, and contrary to what people may think, it's not an easy profession to get into, and not many people succeed." "Well, my husband believes in his ability to write," said Georgina, "and I have the utmost of faith in him. I mean, what kind of a wife would I be if I didn't? You know what they say, Creativity should always be encouraged. But you haven't seen any of his work, Morgan insisted. How do you know he's good? He says he's good, but you've only got his word for it. Has he written any publications that you know anything about? Essays or articles, for example, that can give you an insight or idea of his potential as a writer? You've only heard from the horse's mouth that he's good. But how do you know that's actually true? Well, he has an English degree behind him, doesn't he? So surely that must count for something. Not necessarily. A degree doesn't guarantee anything, said Fern, who had interjected herself into the conversation. You can be good at English, but it doesn't mean you can write. Writing is a skill. You also need an active imagination, and everything else besides. Anyway, writing is an art form. I mean, you may have all the tools to create a magnificent piece of art, but if you don't know how to paint, how are you going to bring it all together? Not everyone has what it takes to become an accomplished author. They may think they do, of course, but they could be lying to themselves or genuinely believe that they are good when they're not at all. I mean, think of all those people that enter singing competitions, for example, on programs like America's Got Talent. I gather, in some of those auditions, many of the applicants seriously believe they can sing like an angel, and don't even realise they sing so badly, and that they're completely tone deaf. I mean, think about it, Georgina. What do you really know about your husband's ability to write? You're just taking his word for it that he's a great writer. If you ask me, the very fact that he shares nothing with you about the progress he's making on his book and the way you claim he reacts when you ask him anything about it is decidedly odd as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he should at least have let you read an example of his work, don't you think? It sounds to me as if he's hiding something from you. What are you suggesting? Georgina had asked, looking slightly rattled. Are you saying that my husband is stringing me along and not actually writing this book of his? Please, God, you don't think that, do you? Well, it's a possibility, isn't it? Said Fern. It wouldn't be the first time that has happened. Think about it. I mean, Keith has a great deal, doesn't he? He's got a roof over his head, a comfortable home, food in his belly, and no responsibility whatsoever, apart from, well, attending to the kids after they return from school, and making them lunch every day. He can get out of bed when he likes, and sleep in late, and you won't even know a thing about it. From what you've told us over the years, he's very good at spending your money, with not much to show for any of it, if you ask me. You go out to work, you cover all the family costs and bills, and the mortgage as well. You've paid for his extravagant, very costly flights to go overseas, so he can do some much-needed research for his so-called book that you know nothing about. He's at home all the time claiming to write this book, but why hasn't he shown you even a page of his work? You've invested so much in him, along with a great deal of blind faith, if you ask me. But you're just being incredibly naive about all this because you want to believe the best in your husband, Georgina. But you've got to start asking yourself some very tough questions. But don't you understand, Fern? Keith does not want me to see his book, not until it's accepted by a publishing house and until it's published and on the bestseller list. Then after that he wants me to read his book when it's in print, and I can appreciate that. It was this time that Morgan was the one who snorted. I'm sorry. I hate to say this, Georgina, but Fern is absolutely right. I have to agree with her on this one. She had put a gentle hand on Georgina. You're a brilliant woman, Georgina, with so much talent, believe me. You're highly regarded in the legal community, and especially by the likes of me and Fern. You're an absolute brilliant attorney. No one can dispute that for a second. You're astute and very accomplished. Yet when it comes to your husband Keith, you have far more faith in him than he actually deserves. I'm sorry to say this, Georgina, because I know you don't want to hear this. But Keith has done nothing over the last 7 years to show or prove to you that he's accomplished anything at all. I mean, in 7 years, he hasn't even told you what his book is about. And that strikes me as bizarrely insane. Why all this evasiveness? Why all this secrecy? If he wants to be a stay-at-home father, fair enough, taking care of your children, while you bring in the money. I can understand that. A lot of people have that kind of arrangement, when one partner earns more than another. And you earn a great salary, Georgina. But I'm worried Keith might be taking advantage of you. Surely you want him to pull his weight around the house. From what you told me, you often arrive home and the dishes haven't even been washed or put away. He doesn't even make dinner in the evenings for you, when you've been out at work all day. You're the one that comes home, gets dinner started and cleans up, which boggles my mind. You're the one paying all the bills for the last 7 years or so. If you remember, Keith asked you for 1 year off to write his book, and now it's been 7. How long is this going to go on for? Georgina paused for a brief moment. Her face had grown ashen. As Morgan's sobering words appeared to have hit a raw nerve with her, her good friend had expressed what she'd been clandestinely thinking about over the last couple of years or so, but hadn't actually had the courage to dare to admit to herself, rather like some clever avoidance tactic that could stop her from facing the truth head-on, like a pair of glaring headlights. You think I've given him far too much leeway in his writing, don't you? She said soberly. I've been too easy on him, I guess. Perhaps he's been slacking on the book, because he's not accountable to anyone, is he? He doesn't have any deadlines to meet, and he can cruise along at his own leisurely pace, without a care in the world, which gives him plenty of room to procrastinate, or become rather lazy. Maybe he's even losing interest in his writing project, but doesn't want to admit that to me. I sincerely hope that that is not the case. But unfortunately, Keith can be as closed up as a sea clam, and getting anything out of him is extremely difficult, I find. Who knows how far he's got with his work, Georgina? But yes, I think you've been far too easy on him. You let him get away with murder. He tells you nothing about the book he's writing. I'm just a little concerned, that's all. Because recently you've been paying for first-class plane tickets to exotic destinations all over the world for the purposes of research when it comes to your husband's book. And yet you have no clue what he's actually writing about. If my husband wanted to jet off to glamorous destinations all over the world, if he was investing in some kind of project, I think I'd like to know what it was all about, don't you? And I probably would want to accompany him on his adventure and bring along the kids for the journey, because it might be a fun experience. But he tells you nothing. Of course, I appreciate writers' need to research the background of some of their novels, and sometimes going to a beautiful destination can inspire their creative juices to flow more abundantly. I get that, I really do. But you have to ask yourself, Georgina, a very hard, uncomfortable question. Why has Keith not shown you anything he's been writing for 7 whole years, for goodness sake? I'm sorry to be so brutal, Georgina, but how do you know the book your husband is writing even exists? Asked Morgan, her steely blue eyes fixing on Georgina, with a kind of look that suggested that she genuinely believed that although Georgina was astute about many things, she was fast asleep as far as her husband was concerned. Georgina's face flushed appropriately a rather pinkish colour, the heat suddenly rising to her cheeks, for her friend's candid honesty had taken her somewhat aback. Georgina was an attractive woman in her early 40s, and always looked elegantly attired and well presented. She was the kind of attorney many were eager to put their faith in, as she was very good and accomplished at her job. But when it came to her personal life, she seemed to look at it through rose-coloured spectacles. Perhaps she didn't want to see all the parts of her life that seemed more than a little misaligned, like when you look at something a little too closely, perhaps, and become all the more aware of all the imperfections, when it's so much easier to pretend that they don't even exist in the first place. Denial was certainly gratifying, when it meant avoiding some rather discombobulating truths that you didn't want to address. For Georgina, there was no doubt that her friend's words had seriously rattled her. It was rather like both Morgan and Fern were encouraging her to take a closer look at her husband Keith, and the thought made her feel extremely uncomfortable. It was true every time she had confronted Keith about the novel he appeared to be writing, that he claimed would one day be an international bestseller. He would become decidedly defensive, sometimes aggressively so, and then he'd bring on some rather alarmingly childish tactics, from sulking to stamping his feet and slamming every single door in the house, to make his point very clear. Sometimes Keith would behave like a petulant, spoilt teenager, and Georgina would often think her two children were a lot more grown up than he actually was. "What is it you want to know, Georgina?" he would ask her very abruptly, his dark eyes narrowing, while his lip would tremble. He looked as if any second he might potentially explode and go off into one of his temper tantrums. It was when her husband reacted like this that Georgina had wanted to close down the conversation almost immediately, as by nature she hated causing her husband undue upset or rubbing him up the wrong way. The next thing she knew, he'd become disagreeably cantankerous, so for the last 7 years she had been treading on eggshells with him, just to keep the peace in their household. "I just want to know how your book is coming along," she would say to him, trying to sound as casual as she could. "There's no need to be so reactive, Keith. I'm asking you a simple question, that's all. I'd just like to know how your book is coming along," she would say to him, trying to sound as casual as she could. "There's no need to be so defensive. Can't I ask my husband a simple question without having my head bitten off? I'm not your enemy, Keith. I'm on your side. I'm invested in your book as much as you are, I'll have you know." "The book is coming along just fine, I'll have you know, Georgina," Keith would snap rather indignantly, his face looking disagreeably chastened. "I don't need you asking me all these questions, do I? I need to focus on the plot of my story, which is becoming extremely exciting. It's a story with so many suspenseful twists and turns that the reader will never ever anticipate. And it's in all these teasers that will make my book a rip-roaring success. J.K. Rowling can eat her heart out. She ain't got nothing on me. I can see my book on display in all the bookshops in the town, and people lining up to get my signature from me. This book I'm writing is going to be one of a kind, let me tell you, and people will be talking about it long after I'm gone." "I hope that's true, love, I really do. I do admire your confidence and faith in your work. But for your sake, I hope your dreams do come into fruition one day, as you've been working so desperately hard on that book of yours. But why are you being so evasive, so desperately guarded about everything? Your attitude does irk me a little, you know. I'd like to know what you're writing about. Can't you at the very least read me a paragraph from your work? I'd love to hear it, I really would." "So is that it, Georgina? You want to spoil everything, do you, by insisting on a sneak preview before the appointed time? I'm sorry, but that's never going to happen. You know how important my work is to me. I'm writing a bestseller that's going to change our lives forever on the financial front. Pardon me if I don't want to share the details of my story with you. I told you I want it all to be a lovely surprise, and you could be the first person after the publisher to read my book. I'm going to dedicate my book to you because you believe in me. Well, at least I hope you do. But after all this cross-examining on your part, I'm beginning to doubt you have any faith in me at all. In fact, I'm beginning to doubt it very much." "Don't be so ridiculous, Keith. Listen to yourself. You do tend to overreact. You know I've always believed in your capabilities. If I didn't, I wouldn't have been the one supporting you financially for the past 7 years or so, for the purposes of allowing you to write your book and explore your talent. But why don't you give me a sneak preview of what you've already written? I think I could give you very good feedback from a reader's perspective. I could tell you what I think of your plot and your characters. See whether the twists and turns in your book that you talk about have me on the edge of my seat. I think my opinion could be invaluable to you. You never know, I might give you some good pointers." "I don't need your opinion, love. What I'm writing is nobody's business until it's published. I'd like you to respect and honour my privacy in this regard. It'll be worth your while, I can promise you that. Just give me more time. You won't be disappointed. My book is very nearly completed." Georgina had tried to put on a positive front, but her heart sank, and she felt herself become as wilted and as sad as a dying wild flower in an alpine field. Perhaps she had sensed that Keith's reluctance to share with her anything about the book he was writing gave her a profound sense that something was up with her husband. But the doubt she was having made her feel as if she was being unreasonably demanding. But why all the secrecy, the reluctance to even give her a clue about what his novel was about? She didn't even know how many chapters he had written yet, how successful his studies had been when he'd taken trips abroad for the purposes of his research. It was when Fern and Morgan had been asking awkward yet thought-provoking questions about her husband's book, and about his strange defensive behaviour in not allowing her to know what he was writing about, had certainly made her wonder if for 7 years whether her husband had been writing anything at all. She chastised herself for doubting Keith's integrity, but she couldn't help herself. 7 years had gone by, and Keith had not even revealed a single detail about the book he was writing. It would seem every time she'd asked him a question, he completely shut her down, and made her feel like a monster about even harmlessly inquiring about the book. Was that even normal behaviour coming from her husband, she wondered? She didn't think it was. So there we are. That is the end of part 1. Part 2's tomorrow night. And I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye, good night.